Let's continue our meeting. We had an executive session. We had a good, constructive conversation regarding the next steps of moving forward, hiring our next superintendent. We have a consent agenda in front of us to discuss the personnel items. Do I have a motion?
I motion that we accept the consent agenda as provided.
I second.
We've had this before us. Any comments, questions, thoughts? Would you please call the roll?
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Mr. Posh?
Yes.
Mr. Hines?
Yes.
Ms. Serini?
Yes.
Ms. Lewis?
Yes.
George?
We have 3 items for you. Doug will run through a brief update on the middle school project. He has some slides, and then Jack will show you some up-to-date pictures.
Great.
Good evening, and as George says, we basically have an update today. We don't have any requests, but we want to do our due diligence and give monthly updates of the progress of the project, as along with the budget. So we currently, for each middle school, that's the summary that we have that we're managing towards. So as we know, we've had an increase for Monticello for the kitchen, but that's the summary. So this is the targets that we're still proceeding with and managing within. Last December, the board gave approval for a director of business operation to have signature authority, and so it gives us the ability to execute some change orders. This month, we actually executed some change orders. They are actually deducts. The total that we had this month was deducts for a number of different issues. So as we go forward, we're going to continue. If we have large items, we'll definitely go ahead and bring them to the board. We'll do everything we can to keep everybody informed of the status of the project and changes that are upcoming. If we have smaller items, then we can go ahead and we can get those approved within the project team so that we can continue on with the construction. So for Monticello, we had a couple changes. We had a combined deduct change order for the E-rate, where this is basically work that the electrical contractor is going to perform. They're going to be reimbursed directly by the federal government for this E-rate system. So we were able to remove that scope and the budget from their contract. We also are making the transition to the interactive display. So these change orders are the deducts basically for the costs difference of taking out the projectors. And then we'll have another request where the district is actually going to buy the interactive display monitors, and we'll be turning those over to Turner so that they can go ahead and install them. So that's really the only change in scope is.
So the cost of the new displays then won't be coming out of the construction budget, but the installation will. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yep. For Monticello, we also have finalized the cost for the interior signage, so we have.
Finally finalized.
That's right. So we have those costs that were approved. And then we also had the rated stair partition, which we've been talking about. We finalized the cost for that. That was a clear unknown, so we've executed that as a change order. And in Roxboro, we also had a combined change order for the E-rate and interactive display. We also had a deduct for AT&T updated services. As we came into the existing conditions, we had to make some modifications, and it was actually a deduct. And then finally, we had added some heat detectors for some additional safety and some additional requirements. There were some modifications to the equipment, so we needed to do that. So you have in your pack-up kind of the update. So here we're rolling up all the changes that have been executed. The ones that are in blue are the ones I just discussed. And then really the items that we have below are items that we still have tracking that we're anticipating to come up. There's a couple items that we have as we're working together. We've had some discussions and some requests and some approvals of allowance expenditures. And as we reviewed the GMP, we do have allowances built into the project. The next board meeting, I'll start sharing those as we're drawing down on those so you can see what's being approved and everything. But basically, this is already funds that are within the GMP that we know we're going to spend somehow. And now we're coming into items and we're approving them to be spent for different items. So some of the items that we might have seen before in this are moving off into the allowances. And then we'll be tracking those the same way, so that we can track to see how deep we are into the project and how much we spend, so that we have a comfort level that we're managing the budget correctly. And it's the same for Roxboro. I don't think I need to get into all those
So
details.
the placeholder for signage at Roxboro has not yet been replaced with a real number. But the interior signage for Monty came in less than the placeholder, so can we hope that the same will happen at Rox?
Roxboro's taking a little bit longer to price up because there's some asbestos, so we have to make sure we deal with that properly. So I think hopefully the asbestos magnitude won't be real significant.
And the asbestos is connected to the signage? That's,
You tear down when you remove those.
remove
okay,
it.
we're affecting the wall.
Just like we removed
Gotcha.
the blackboards inside
Yeah.
the classrooms.
And then we
Same
discovered,
approach.
okay. And there's a noticeable difference in our new forecasted prices for the cupolas. So we're down from our $50,000 placeholder to something that looks closer to a real number. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, the placeholder was just an original rough order of magnitude number, and now we've gotten preliminary pricing from our painting subcontractor, which includes scaffolding as well as the cost to do the work, and we've been pushing him to finalize it. So we're anticipating getting that. Actually, he told me he would get it to me tomorrow, the
Great.
final pricing.
Good.
And that'll be for both?
Yeah.
And they're same order of magnitude, but they're both less than we were holding, so that's good.
The special ed bathroom is a hard number?
Yes.
It's a hard number. We're still kind of looking at there's some questions that we have, just on the details, so we're hoping to get that executed at the next board meeting.
So the next piece, I think maybe that, let's see, no, this is, so I'm interested in a couple of things that I haven't seen, and if I'm jumping ahead, I'm happy to wait. But have we gotten a final determination on that Monticello ceiling / floor where there was the crack and we were looking for some engineering determination? Do we
Yes.
have that? Where are we on that?
We do have we've had the engineer has come back out site. We've looked at the materials, and they've actually been able to finalize the number, and we're gonna shift that over and cover that out of allowances.
Okay.
So that they go ahead and proceed with it.
So that's not a,
So it's not
that's
gonna be
not a heart
change.
attack.
Right.
Okay.
That'll be something that you'll see as it comes up.
Okay.
Yep.
Very good.
Yep.
And, do I hear somebody else?
Well, I got things, but go ahead.
Okay, and then the other one was, and I know it's still reasonably new, but any more news on the Roxboro Tunnel?
Yes, and can update exactly where we are on the drawings. That's another one that we're looking at. We're gonna be handling that through allowance. She can get in more detail of the actual status, but last time we talked, there was a suggestion of possibly having a cost savings if we did a plate. Structural engineer took a look at it, said it's gonna be easier in some terms, but also it's gonna add some complexity for movement and for the bolts, for the anchoring, and then also with the thickness, we have a finish level that we need to meet for the driveway when we get done. So we're actually gonna go back to one of the original ideas that we talked about, where we're gonna peel it off and we're gonna replace it with new. And then that way we can get to the waterproofing in, and we can go ahead and we can get the concrete.
When you,
We
I'm
can-
sorry, when you say peel it off,
We're gonna take the roof
lid.
off of, yeah.
Got it.
Call it the lid, yeah,
okay.
yeah, so
And is
those,
that one piece that you can dig down and sort of lift up and put a new one on, or?
well, I think what their method is gonna be, they'll do some partial excavation, and they're gonna saw cut around it, and then as they demolish it, it'll come out.
And then you'll form and pour a new single thick layer instead of
Basically
it'll be
replacing what's
laminating.
there.
Okay.
There'll be a
Which
little
has been there
structural layer,
for,
and then
And
water,
then there'll be the
years.
concrete
and
for the
then there'll be
trucks.
the drivable surface.
Okay.
yeah, right, so we can't assume that,
So those details are getting finalized.
So, yeah, so we just hot off the press, got the final engineering details at 5 o'clock, so,
Brand new.
hot off the press. So that bulletin should have been issued probably around 6 o'clock, because we were all ready to go, just waiting for those final details, so.
Great.
It should be in the contractor's hands tomorrow morning.
And will that include, so there were two sort of ancillary issues. There was the famous downspout, and then there was the grading that,
Yeah,
that sort of over by what will be the special ed rooms.
right. So the grading is gonna be all resolved. The downspout, I think we've discovered, is either an overflow or kind of a unnecessary downspout at this point. We've had the roofing guy out.
I had our consultant who we used, Mr. Taylor, looked at it and said that, first off, was a terrible job, whoever did it. And it's not in a proper place to provide the drainage that it should. So what we did is we blocked it to see if it's going to cause us any issues. And if it doesn't cause us any issues when it rains, we're going to remove it. If it's
Well, it's
needed.
receiving roof
Receiving water,
runoff.
but if you look where it's at, it's in the middle of
The run.
the run, where it should be down at the end or around the corner of it. So again, if it's gonna handle the water, and we can
I
also check it in other ways, putting a hose up there, as long as we don't have issues from it. At some point, somebody felt we needed it. We don't know who installed it. No one has a recollection of when it was done and why it was done. So we
It's the
plugged it
ghost
just
gutter guy.
to see. And if we have to, if we need it, what believe we want to do is replace it and put it in the proper way. And since the ground's going to be opened up to replace the concrete, we'll
So the
properly
documents
pitch
that
it.
we've issued, I'm certain are showing that to be all remedied. So the downspout will be connected correctly and
Right.
all that other good stuff in the drawings that we're issuing now.
Great.
And then if time shows that, we truly don't need it, then we'll just eliminate that from the scope.
But
And it'll be a
nonetheless,
little
so
deduct.
Little deduct.
Worst
A
case
little tiny
scenario,
one.
it will be incorporated and attached to existing.
Correct.
To the catch basin,
Yeah.
yes.
and
Yeah,
to
well,
the
there's
catch
some
basin.
talk that catch basin wasn't performing the way it was supposed
And
to perform.
that's gonna be replaced.
Yeah, and those things
That's-
fill up. I mean,
Good, okay.
Pardon?
those things fill up.
And I think I mentioned when we were going through, I've been here 18 years and never had a problem with that catch basin in that corridor.
Okay, great.
So,
Fair enough.
Good to know. Good. There were some issues at Roxboro when you were going through the science rooms, on the missing drywall between, I guess, above the ceiling. It had to go all the way up.
fire stop,
It seemed very complicated and expensive. Do we know more about that?
Yes, we've got some costs for those, and that's another item we're gonna handle with allowance. So we can go ahead, and I think it was 74,000. It was around 74,000 for labor and material anticipated to go ahead and extend all those up for the fire-rated corridors.
So at this time, you don't see a change order? Okay. And also, I think the same thing regarding the skylight in the cafeteria?
cafeteria.
So we
That's-
have that as part of the ceiling change order, and that we're getting some resolution for the pricing for that too, so that'll be coming up.
And it's too bad we can't make that a skylight. That'd be very cool, but
That bridge was burned before
and
we occupied these seats.
another board dealt with that.
Yep.
Would've been neat to see though.
Do you want to continue? I think we,
Yes, so then just to kind of wrap up the summary is where we are today. We basically, this shows each school, and it shows the owner hard costs, the soft costs, what's been executed, and what's pending and forecasted. And then kind of the tracking mechanism is in our project, we're about 53% calendar-wise into our project. What we have remaining in the owner contingency is about 63%, so that's good. And if you take what we have executed and what we're forecasting, then we're about 49%. So we're tracking well with spending the contingencies that we have in the project with the changes that are coming up. And then those are all numbers. And Turner is, they're working full steam. I'll probably get weekly updates on the PCO logs, and so we're working constantly. So we're getting real-time updates on all of these. So as I mentioned, we have a project, we still have RFIs, we have issues, but we're managing through everything. And I think we brought to your attention the major issues that we have.
So we've burned through about 50% of our contingency. At least that's what I'm seeing.
Yeah, yep.
Okay.
However, we're now finished with demolition, so most of the unknowns are now known. I hate to say that out loud.
Yeah, we're still finding stuff.
But that does bring comfort in terms of things that you would spend contingency money on.
Right.
Right.
I did want to touch base really quick. You, in the consent agenda, already approved the board resolution to purchase the monitors from Schoolhouse Electronics. I just want to give you a real brief why you did that. This route saved the district $80,000 and $100 and some odd dollars. What we found out was that the monitors that we were selected, they were not on state term pricing. So we struggled with how we're going to manage this. That's why we're going to have Turner have their company, purchase and provide them. Well, Frank CHUH ended up doing some research, and we found Schoolhouse Electronics had the same monitor that we're looking for at a discounted price, of course. But unfortunately, Schoolhouse Electronics is not on state term pricing. So I checked with our attorney. We found the same exact model through a company that's through Ohio School Council Consortium. And we can legally do what we just did because there was a competitive pricing provided through the state, through Ohio School Council for that same monitor. And even if we bought that monitor, that's where we're saving $80,000. So Schoolhouse Electronics is giving us that much of a savings purchasing these directly.
Yeah, and that's the monitor.
And that's the
we're
one,
buying,
right? This is our sample?
It's not exactly that model, but it's that size. So
Okay.
each classroom will have something that large. And interactive, you'll be able to go up there and,
Okay.
we have to learn that yet ourselves.
I know. They played with it today.
Right, we've been playing with it today. But I just wanted you to understand what we did, and Matt Sagone suggested that we did not require a board resolution, but to make sure everybody was aware of what we were doing, that he suggested we do it. So we did it.
Well, thank you, really, for
Thanks.
keeping going. It's a great deal of due diligence that saved a lot of money. Again, which is sort of the story of your department.
Trying.
You have some pictures to show.
Why is it not? These are photographs of the composition floor pour back at Monticello, okay? And this is the existing condition. This is, I don't know what's going on with the mouse, but you can see that up against the stair, there's about a 2-inch step between the composition floor, the substrate, and the slab in the stair. And then, I don't know. All right, we'll try that. Okay, so that's existing conditions. I'm good. And then this is another picture, and this is a different stair, and you can see the transition between the subfloor and the slab is a little thicker there. It's about 2 inches. Here's another existing condition. You can see that there was a patch that we installed on top of the substrate where there was a hole, and then it looks like somebody else had done a previous patch. So, you get an idea of what the composition floor of the substrate looks like. And then this is actually the new work. So this is, before we do the new work, we have to go through and, clean the area, vacuum it, and then we have to seal all the pipe penetrations. So that's occurred there. This next photo is, this photo in the middle is, the pour back materials are only good for 1.5 inches. It's the maximum thickness you can install. So at this particular location, there was kind of a divot. So we filled it in with a gravel material, just so we didn't exceed the 1.5 inches. And then you can see running left and right on the screen, there are some cracks there. So we route out all the cracks, clean them up, and then we install an epoxy joint structural repair. I couldn't get a good photo of that, but you can see it running left and right on the screen and then also on the right-hand side. So we had to fill in all the cracks with the epoxy
And that
material.
expands and contracts, right?
Well, the epoxy doesn't really expand and contract. It's an epoxy. It doesn't really change shape. It's actually pretty fluid. It just sets up and cures in place. And then, so this was the start of the actual rework. This is the stair in the north side of the building, and you can see that yellow wall, you'll see it in a couple photos here, but the pins in the middle, those are set to make sure we get the correct depth with the new material, and you can see that's about 2 inches there. Again, we can only do 1.5 inches, so that's just the first photo, and then the second photo is the installer actually installing it. He's working from the stair towards us. And then this is the finished condition that it looked, what it looked like today. And again, the, you can only go 1.5 inches with this material, so we only did 1.5 inches, and then we're gonna have to come back and do a second layer on top of this. So I just wanted to demonstrate that, one of the reasons this is taking, why it takes a while. But, I mean, it's a nice finish. And then this is actually a finished second floor corridor. That was poured today, and we were walking on it today. The strength on these, it's 4,000 PSI is the final specified strength, and we did a 24-hour test, and we came up to, I think, 2,800 PSI. So we're getting really good strengths, high strength. You can walk on it. We're going to keep the traffic low on it for a while, but that's the condition that it looks like when we're finished. At each of the doorways, we still have to do a little bit of transition because every doorway is a little bit up and down. So that's not completely finished, but that gives you a pretty good idea what it's going to look like. And then here's another shot looking the same quarter, only you're further down. So that, again, that was installed today. And then we're going to have another pour on Friday on the second floor. That should complete the second floor. And then next week, we're hoping to get the first floor. There's a couple ramps that are going to have to be handled separately because they're ramps. But that's, those are the photos of the compo floor, pour back.
So that is, you'll be able to install the floor on top of that? I mean,
The flooring will go on top of that, yeah.
The carpeting or whatever it is goes.
And what is the finish gonna be?
I think in the hallways, it's vinyl tile,
Yeah.
and in the classrooms, which we're not doing this application, but in the classrooms, you get carpet.
So it levels out beautifully.
That's, it's almost like water. It's really self-leveling. That's why we have the issues at the different heights in the, so we'll address those. It's not the end of the world.
What a great product.
One of those things where in the future, people will have no idea the lengths we went to put that floor down.
That's the goal.
Or the amount of work it took somebody to chip it all out to get
Yeah,
to this
to
point.
get all the old
That's
stuff off.
that was a dirty job.
That was it.
All right,
Great.
thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for the update.
Very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
Okay, so we are moving on to our last item, which is the data series part 2.
Yeah, so Allison is gonna come up.
Wasn't there?
This wasn't here when I was
Right.
sitting at my machine yesterday.
Just pull it off.
So as Allison sets up her presentation, remember this is part 2 of our data series. We were doing it in 3 parts. The first part was our district, the state assessments. And today she's presenting on the assessments that we as a district decided that we wanted to utilize. So I don't know if you want to bring some others up with you, Allison? We have a couple more microphones, 3 more microphones if we need some others.
To do our phase facilities update.
Just you? Okay.
Did that get,
Kind of
the
chopped
agenda?
us off.
Yes.
did I
You skipped finance?
skipped it?
You skipped 2
Nice
things.
to see you.
No, the schoolhouse,
Yeah, we did skip something, I think.
yeah, we'd skip, we'll handle the facilities
After?
after this.
Okay, great.
Yeah, thank you.
Just make sure we didn't
That way we
forget.
can let folks go home too.
We were gonna talk about it afterwards, but I think we're probably okay, 'cause we're just gonna get an update of what was
Okay.
discussed.
Okay.
And I think you can take anything back
Yeah.
to George.
Okay.
So he doesn't need to stay.
Okay.
Do we need to vote on this thing, this finance thing for Scott too?
It was part of the
Part of-
consent
okay,
agenda.
consent, okay.
So the consent agenda changed between I think when we looked at it this weekend and today.
Yeah, that was added Monday. Do you want me to speak briefly to that item? Or are we good with that? That was just when, at the end of the fiscal year, because no fund can be in the negative, we advance from the general fund to all those other funds, then we turn around and return those advances back. So that's that accounting transaction happening.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
All right, so if we're all set, I will go ahead and get started. Thank you for the time this evening.
Can you guys hear her okay? Do you need the microphone a little bit closer? You're pretty soft-spoken.
I am the second oldest of 4 girls, and we yell, so I was trying to keep it a little calm, but no problem. Is that better?
Yeah.
Does that feel better? Okay. So this is the second in a series of 3 sessions planned for the 2018-2019 school year. In the first session, I focused on the district's performance on the annual state report card, and we know that the results for the report card are based largely on the Ohio State tests, which are external measures of performance. So tonight, I'm going to focus on some of the other data points that we use in the district to measure students' academic performance. And in the interest of time, I'm going to focus on 3 grade levels at the elementary and middle school level tonight, and then the third session will focus on the high school. So specifically tonight, I'm going to share what we are assessing, why we're using the tools that we're using to assess, and I'm going to provide specific examples at 3 grade levels. So that's kindergarten, grade 3, and grade 6. So each year, with the assistance of the curriculum and instruction team, we produce a district testing calendar. And so board members have a paper copy of the calendar. There are some additional copies for audience members, and then there are active links in the presentation for our viewing audience to view this information as well. This is an internal document intended for staff. It is not the easiest document to read. It is not intended for parents or community members. Our amazing communications department does publish a more user-friendly calendar that was emailed to all of our families at the start of the school year and is also available on the website. So again, this is intended for staff use only. So what you have is the table is organized by grade level. So that's what you see on the far left-hand column. And then there is a space that gives the test name or the content area. And then you'll see a start date and an end date. Very rarely are tests required to be administered on a single day. Otherwise, we have what we call a testing window. So you'll see a date where the test can begin to be administered, and then the last day of the administration. And then the final column there is for the data system, where the test is housed and where the results can be found. So then I also use color to try to identify who else may receive the results or who might be mandating the results. So you'll see items typed in black are shared with or tied to mandates from the Ohio Department of Education. Items in green are also external assessments, but we choose to administer them in the district because they serve multiple purposes and usually provide us with information that we can't easily get otherwise. And then the items in pink are tied to our board-adopted and purchased curricular tools. So these are the most internal measures that we ask teachers to capture and to share. But it is important to note that these are not the only internal measures that are used or that should be reflected on. And then as we go through the specific grade level examples, I'll refer back to which ones are required by the state, which ones we choose to use, and then which ones are tied to our curricular assessments. So why do we assess? And the simplest answer is we assess to collect data. We assess to collect data. So when we first started having these public data conversations, I think it was back in the 16-17 school year, we started with an exercise to help us define the word data because it can mean so many things. And so what I want you to remember from that time is that when I use the term data here in this context, I'm talking about anything that provides evidence of student learning or the impact of instruction. And what we know is that that evidence can take many forms and is collected constantly. Teachers collect tons of data. I mean, educators do that as part of their regular practice. We assess all of the time. So this is really about us asking teachers to focus in on specific data points at similar points in time during the school year. So another way to phrase the question is, why are we focusing on these unit assessments, right? Why do we pick certain tools? And again, the simple answer is that they are part of the curricular tools our curriculum specialists piloted with district teachers and then brought to the board for approval. So they are the tests that most closely align to the primary instructional tools that the board, the community adopted and paid for. They are directly connected to classroom instruction. The unit tests are correlated to our state grade level standards and our district learning expectations. So these expectations, again, the curriculum specialists worked in along with classroom teachers to identify the key learning expectations that kids should have. Unlike the state tests and other external tools, these are measures that we control. Our targets for mastery don't change, and we have worked to make the entire process completely transparent. So everyone has access to the test questions and the answers ahead of time. What we want students to know and how we determine if they know it is not a secret. Through our curriculum specialists, teachers are able to provide feedback about changes to the content of the questions, the test format, and even the point values. So at the elementary level, we used our district grade level meeting time over the 17-18 school year to formally review the tests in mathematics, English language arts, and science. All of those discussions were captured and shared in our Google Classrooms so that all impacted staff were able to see what was happening and understand what was discussed even if they weren't able to participate. So I'm going to move into looking at specific grade level examples. Do you have any questions before we start looking at those?
I think we're going to have questions when we see the examples. I mean, I think this is,
No problem.
but you're heading in a great direction so far. Thanks.
So kindergarten, so this is just like a snapshot of the kindergarten section on the district testing calendar. So we can see there's one line for, that's in black for the KRA or the kindergarten readiness assessment. There are 2 lines that are in green. So again, these are assessments that we're not required to administer, that we choose to administer because of the information that they provide. And then the ones in pink are connected to our curricular tools. So first up is the kindergarten readiness assessment. So this one is required by the Ohio Department of Education. When we think about the length of time that teachers have to administer the test, they can begin to administer from the first day of school, which for us I think was the August 20th, through November 1st. There are 4 different components that are measured, and they're all based on Ohio's learning standards. And the results from the language and literacy portion, which is one of the 4, are used to identify students' reading status. So it's another department requirement for students in kindergarten through 3rd grade. So we use the language and literacy score to identify students' reading status. When we administer the test can be administered online using an iPad with students. There are several components as part of the social foundations sections and physical well-being that are observational items. So these are things that as part of lining up the class to go to recess, a student might observe different behaviors that are identified through social foundations and can check off whether or not students meet the skill listed.
Can we ask some questions about
Sure.
the kindergarten readiness assessment? So, is this all done in one sitting? Is it done one-on-one? it says online observation on 101. I mean, I think one of the things we heard from the kindergarten teachers is that they need to be focusing on one student, one child, and then they have aides dealing with the other children. I mean, I guess, can you walk us through the amount of time it takes, one sitting, two sittings? I mean,
Sure. So there are 50 total items, and so they're outlined through each of the measures. The test is not intended to be done in a single sitting, and that's because, again, for social foundations, 12 of the items are observational. So if I'm sitting focused, talking with you, I'm not going to be able to observe from the behaviors that I need to monitor. So it is intended to be done in sessions. Or again, like the observational pieces need to be done when kids are actively engaged in some kind of task or activity and then monitored that way. There are mathematics items and language and literacy items that can be done online. Actually, when the kindergarten teachers shared their concerns, it was during one of our regularly scheduled grade level team meetings. It was September 26th or the 27th, whatever that Wednesday was. And at that time, Mr. Swaggart was there with me along with some of the other curriculum specialists. We said that when they said that they were concerned about the length of time it was taking them to administer the test, we said we'd look into seeing if we could get some additional assistance for them. Well, there was one final session that was available, so 3 of our team members and then 2 building level staff went to that additional training to get some to be able to administer the test. It does require a special training from the state, and then you have to get a certificate in order to administer the assessment. So through that process, we met with, actually, I asked via email if any teachers wanted assistance because we had the extra help. I think initially 3 teachers responded, and then as we went to buildings to meet with those 3 teachers, one teacher from one building turned into 3 kindergarten teachers, and then we went to the second building where the second teacher who initially requested assistance, then that turned into, well, since you're here, sure, I could use some help as well. And so we had an initial meeting with those teachers to find out, well, how do you administer the test? And almost all of them said, well, I do it one-on-one with kids. So our next question is, have you ever tried to use the iPad? Because some of the questions are designed to be done in small group with kids on an iPad, similar to what some of their curricular tools are administered. And they all went no. And usually the reason was because when we started to administer the test, I believe the first year of administration was 3 years ago, it wasn't the most user-friendly tool. And it doesn't take but one time for someone to try to use something, it doesn't work, I'm not going back to it, because to be honest, I really don't want to have to give this test in the first place. So what we did was we set up, first we started with just one student to see how the use of the iPad worked, and then what we started to do was run sessions with about 4 students at a time, so one adult monitoring 4 students on an iPad, and we were able to get through, I think we did 11 or 12 of the 14 mathematics items, and then I think it was like 13 of the 15 language and literacy items on the iPad. So to assess 4 kiddos with one adult monitoring them took about 15 minutes. So,
And this is not dependent on the children having learned how to use the iPads, being able to read because they don't know how to read yet, and all
Great.
that?
it is
Okay.
not dependent on that. So one of the things that we did, there's a practice item or question at the beginning of each of the assessments when they try them online. So we would connect the iPad to the teacher's smartboard. And actually, it was Dr. Bauer who's sitting, I keep referring because the amazing women who volunteered to try to give their colleagues support are sitting back there. So I was actually working with Karen Heinsberg and Julie Raffay and Christy Bauer. And Christy is I guess you're always a kindergarten teacher, so she is a kindergarten teacher, although she works here at the district level, was the one who would explain, bring the kiddos together and explain to them that hi, I'm Dr. Bauer. We're going to be working with you today. She would provide an overview. The woman on the iPad is going to give you some information. If you don't hear her, you press this button and we'll replay it for you. So she explained everything orally, then did an example on the smart board so that all the kids could know what was going to happen. And then we would pull them out in small groups, again, of 3 or 4 to have them go through the assessment. So no, it doesn't require that they have advanced knowledge of how to use the iPad, although there wasn't a single kid that we worked with that didn't know how to swipe and move and press the buttons and, let someone know that their headphones weren't working. So there is a reader. So there's a voice that goes through each question, and it plays one question at a time. The student has to prompt or press a button for it to move from one item to another item. So again, one of the things that can be a point of concern is that it goes too fast, or I'm scared the kids might guess and rapidly go through the question. So you do have to, they can't just quickly go through from one item
So
to
you
the next.
actively request the next question? Okay.
So how long does it take, per student or per class to get this done?
So again, we were able to get through a majority of the language and literacy and mathematics portions in about 15 minutes with a group of 4. And then there is a portion for the language and literacy where the students where we read them a story and they have to answer questions about what they understand about the story and retell certain components of it. So that might take an additional, it's hard to say, it depends on the student, but anywhere from 7 to 12 minutes to do the additional components for math and then that portion of the language and literacy. Then the other items are observational. So the length of time that takes really depends largely on the level of organization and advanced planning by the classroom teacher, because they recommend as part of the training that you observe these behaviors as part of something that's already happening. And if you do not plan in a thoughtful way, like if you have your checklist ready, you're thinking about the task or activity students are going to participate in to be able to check that off, it can take you longer than if you've thought about it and know when exactly you're going to try to assess those items.
I noticed it's like 10 different tests, 10 kindergarten assessment tests. How many of these tests are required, like within the first 90 days?
So when we get to so this one for the kindergarten readiness assessment, the testing window is rather lengthy, again, because you want to give kids time to get adjusted to school. You want teachers to learn their names. They're trying to, get practice of where is the restroom, how do we balance in nap time. So again, that's why they have from the first day of school through November 1st.
Okay.
And again, you can do these tests in pieces and parts. They are not intended to be done in one full setting. The other tests, and you can see from the testing window, so teachers elect to give Dibbles, which is an assessment of early literacy skills. I think they do that in the first month of school because they are your very early literacy skills. Can I identify letters? So if I hold up the letter D, can a student tell me that that's D? Or if I hold up C, can they tell me that that's C? So the Dibbles next and assesses those types of early skills. And in most of the 7 elementaries, the Dibbles Next test is actually administered by another staff member. So in each building, we have elementary ELA leads. So these are teachers who work with students and provide support to staff. And one of the ways that they provide that support is through administering some of these beginning of the year.
So the Dibbles is a pullout, one-on-one, or is that doable in a group?
It's a pull-out one-on-one.
It's a one-on-one, okay.
It's a
So
one-on-one.
somebody else can pull one child out at a time while the rest of the class is going on.
Correct.
And approximately how long does it take to do the Dibbles? Because if I added right from what you were saying on the previous one, it's about 30 minutes per child on the KRA.
Seemed longer than that.
Yeah, it seemed like it'd be a little
Seemed like it would be longer because you'd have to do the observational pieces too.
Yes, so again, and the observational things are, I don't want to oversimplify them, but like, can the student stand in line? Does the student respond to directions on the first reply? So,
Which a kindergartner is rarely,
I mean, and it's
or a 52-year-old.
it's a, or a 41-year-old after a very long day. You know, it's-
So assuming that the KRA takes approximately an hour per child, what do we think the Dibbles takes?
Okay, so I don't think it takes that long, especially, so KRA, when we do a large portion of the test using the iPad, because you can do that in groups of 3 or 4. Dibbles are short probes, so they just take a few minutes to administer. And the tests do change, so they can take a little bit longer depending on the grade level where they're administered, but for kindergarten, beginning of the year, just a few minutes.
But I'm not a kindergarten teacher, but one of the challenges that I, as a teacher, would envision with some of this, especially these longer assessments, is that while you have, let's say, 4 kids working on an iPad, with the blessings of help, those 4 kids are still losing the instructional time that is going on elsewhere. So it's another example of just all of the bouncing balls, if you will, in a classroom, and it's that coordination, and it's a lot of it sounds like a great deal of coordination and trying to do a full lesson while you're missing chunks of kids at different times can be kind of challenging.
Yes, and actually, one of the buildings, when we were there to provide additional support, there were 2 other adults. I believe, I'm not 100%, I believe they were from the Village Tutoring Group, who were also pulling students out to provide additional instructional support. So they were pulling 1 student, so we had 2 additional adults that were pulling 1 student out at a time. At another building that we were in, they were conducting health screenings for students. So actually, that was a good time for us to be in, because we were working with kids while they were doing other tasks, while other students were participating in the health screening. So yes, that it is a balancing act across grade levels at different times for different reasons. All right, so then we have our curricular-based assessments. So we assess in 4 of the content areas: English language arts, mathematics, science, and social studies was added new this year, because if you remember, the board just adopted the social studies curriculum materials at the end of the 17-18 school year. So you have a paper copy of each of the grade level assessments for kindergarten, 3rd grade, and 6th grade. And I'm sorry, not each one. You have the first one, just to give you an idea of what is assessed, the length of the tests, how the questions are shared. On each of the slide, Mrs. Wright, to go back to your question about, so when do these take place, like how many and over how much time? On each of the slides, you'll see how many tests are within a particular grading period. So at the elementary level, our grading timeline separates the year into thirds. So 1 trimester represents 12 weeks of instruction. At the middle school and the high school level, the year is separated into fourths. So each quarter is approximately 9 weeks of instruction. So on the slide, you'll see trimester and quarter. So for English language arts, the primary instructional tool in kindergarten is Super Kids. So again, there are, working with that transition for the start of school and some of the other assessments, there are 2 progress tests or unit tests that we ask teachers to administer during the first trimester, 4 in the second trimester, and 5 in the third trimester. You have in your documents the front copy, or the opening page, so that you can just see a picture of it. But then there are also instructions that come as part of the tool and that were part of the training that teachers received. So what is the 3rd pink page? It's listed as page 5. There's just a little excerpt there from the first paragraph. It says, while formal assessments, such as the progress tests, focus on the phonics and word recognition skills vital to a child's success in learning to read, other critical skills such as phonemic awareness, blending, comprehension, and fluency are best judged informally and more frequently. So observing children as they engage in classwork, independent reading, and discussions is the most effective way to assess their individual strengths and weaknesses. So I say that, and then like immediately as I'm hearing myself, it feels like I might be contradicting what I'm saying, but it's not an either or. It's not that we're saying only assess formally using these unit or progress tests and don't do the other pieces, but we need multiple forms of evidence and multiple data points to determine what it is that students, bless you, what it is that they know and how they demonstrate that understanding. So as you go through the test, here in the timing so the next page, which reads as page 23, it tells you that the tests usually take about 15 to 20 minutes each, but that we shouldn't set time limits, and that the tests are divided into parts, that they can give a part of the test on one day and continue with the other parts over several days. So again, not intended to be done in one single sitting, and certain portions you can do as part of a whole group, or you can do in small groups or even one-on-one, depending on what would best meet the needs of the students. For social studies, we ask that teachers administer one test in each of the 3 trimesters, and that comes from Ohio Studies Weekly. And again, you have an example of one of those, or of the first test for the first trimester included in your packet. So I believe there are 6 questions on that. And like as an example, one of them is a picture of 2 different flags where kids have to identify which one is the American flag. Another question is, they state the pledge every day, so what does it mean to pledge allegiance and things of that nature?
Yeah, some of these are, I'll be honest, like, so, we can debate the merits of saying the Pledge of Allegiance every day. But what does pledge mean? Pledge is absolutely not a kindergarten word. That is well beyond a kindergartner's domain. I also think that this question in today, 2018, is worded so it's rather loaded. And when you're talking about in the age of Colin Kaepernick, what does pledge mean? And option A is to stand up, and option B is to promise. I mean, I just think that's, I don't really love it. I mean, then you move on to the very next question, a good citizen, citizenship, the notion is not age appropriate for a kindergartner, and I'm just going to make that blanket statement. Question 4, one of your responsibilities at school. Responsibilities, I really challenge as a kindergarten appropriate notion. 5, voting is a fair way to decide something, okay. And so I just think that we really need to take a look a little bit deeper. Social studies is, your success in social studies, and I would argue science as well, is really reflected in one's reading ability. And so as I look at some of these, and I picked the social studies world because that's the world I swim in, as you know very well.
I do.
And so I see some of these challenges with these materials. But then I also am wondering, and by asking the question, I really don't mean to propose an idea of an answer, because I genuinely don't know. But I wonder if there's redundancy, because we're talking about, like, the Dibbles is a reading test, right?
It's a
Dibbles.
measure of basic literacy skills.
Okay.
So for kindergarten and first grade, it does not require students to, say, read a passage aloud, so.
Got it, but maybe it's like letters and
Correct, it's
sounds and
identifying the
that's-
letters,
it's the building blocks
can they
of reading.
identify the first sound
Got it.
of a word?
Got it.
Hearing the
So-
word spoken aloud.
And I'm assuming this is probably the work that you're doing with the kindergarten work group that we've got going, but it would seem that maybe we can assume that we're getting similar information in multiple tests. Is that what you're kind of looking into? Because we have Dibbles, we have KRA, which is, is a reading diagnostic. And so I'm just wondering if we can, and again, my assumption is knowing the great intentions of everybody involved. But it does seem a heavy burden of assessment. And I do mourn the loss of instructional time, because it does seem like a really huge investment of instructional time.
So,
I don't know if there's a
yes,
question.
we are working to, yes, we are working to always refine the questions and the tests. So that's part of our ongoing work with teachers, not just at the kindergarten level, but across the elementary school and now the middle school, as we have identified district grade level meeting time for us to review these assessments and talk about instruction, because it's not just about giving the test, right? It is to engage in the conversation. I do not have a kindergartner of my own. I do, however, have my niece is a kindergartner, and she spends a considerable amount of time in my home, and we converse quite frequently, actually, every day. This is our normal FaceTime time. So I would, just from my own personal experience and understanding that children are different, but that is a 5-year-old that I can engage in conversations like that. So when we talk about being a good citizen, while I might have to put that in context, she knows what that means to be a part of a community, whether it's a school community or, the area in which she lives. She has responsibilities, and we use that term. She knows that she's supposed to make up her bed and put her clothes in the dirty clothes hamper. Those are her daily responsibilities. So building that vocabulary and having those conversations are what we're working to do. And when we think about this as the assessment, it goes along with our curricular resource, which is Ohio Studies Weekly, which is it's like a newspaper that's a couple of pages in length, where time is spent with the teacher doing read-alouds, and again, having the conversation about what does it mean to be a citizen, what does it mean to be part of a community. Actually, at one of the elementary schools that we were at, Canterbury, just a couple of days after we were there to assist with the kindergarten readiness assessment, we were doing a classroom walkthrough, and the students were sharing their community projects. So their task was to make these 3D models of different communities. So some of them had people, but it was clear that there were roads and there were buildings. And so there was 2 classes combined, and the teachers were actually talking, they were asking almost the same questions. So it's assessed in that way through a project and through their IB planner and having the dialogue. It's reiterated as part of Ohio Studies Weekly, which is the print resource material. And then part of the data that we collect comes from asking these questions either in whole group or in small groups, where kids can just take a moment to process and see what their response is.
So I'm unsure, you're more qualified than me to determine whether or not the word responsibility or, following rules at school, or if this is vocabulary for a kindergartner. I mean, I've got to really lean on the experts to tell us that.
It's like cat, dog.
Well, yeah, I mean, okay, I mean, the way I look at it is, we've got a curriculum that we're trying to follow, okay? Whether we like it or not, we agreed on it. We theoretically could take it away, but I think we need some advice if that made some sense or not. I mean, when you're looking at a picture of a flag, hopefully this is not the first time our students have seen that. And so I assume that there's stuff that's going on that is instructional, that's leading up to these. And I hope someone in the room is going to tell us that when these tests are being administered, that in itself is a teachable moment. It's not a test. It's a dialogue that's going to happen. It's like, oh, well, I can tell you, this is an American flag, and if you count all those stripes, what are they, or if you look at the number of stars, or we're gonna come in this morning and we're gonna say the pledge, and before you sit down, what do you think this means? I mean, so I'm hopeful that I really am hopeful someone in the room is going to tell us this, and also I think that and I don't want to be reactive to what we heard with the kindergarten teachers. I mean, what we heard is it seemed like there was an unnecessary, it seemed like we were hearing is we're giving these assessments, the data's going nowhere, it's not helping us. I mean, I'm not sure we're ready to answer that today.
Right.
I just want to know, what are we doing? I mean, really, what are the numbers? How long is it taking? Then I think we can get some better idea of the value of the stuff that's going through.
Thank you. I think you did an excellent job of trying to explain what I was trying to explain, and that it's not the vision of a group of 5-year-olds with a pen and paper just circling the questions. It is part of a conversation, an ongoing dialogue, and I don't want to repeat it because I think you did an excellent job of stating.
So someone circles 1 for the American flag. I mean, does that data get re-dated entered? Do we look at that? I mean, what gets done with this? Who uses it?
Either.
So I think that this is an interesting question. I'm kind of glad that we're talking about this particular assessment item. One of the things that we've learned through our work with curriculum instruction and assessment is never talk about an assessment unless you're looking at the assessment. Because there's a lot of misconceptions that happen. People speak from memory. It's like, it should be in front of us. Let's talk about this. Let's see what it looks like. Let's see how we're selecting it. Let's see how we're administering it. So I'm really glad that you're able to actually see these assessment items. And I do want to also go back to, before I talk about what happens with the data, we go by the guides that the state provides us. So when we think about the state standards and the model curriculum that the OD has provided to us, and I just wanted to take a moment just to go specifically to the kindergarten model curriculum, just updated in 2010 or 2017-18. The expectation for learning for kindergartners recognize the American flag as a symbol of the United States and the Pledge of Allegiance and the national anthem as practices of the United States. So when we think about this, this has been the product of a work group of kindergarten teachers, administrators, specialists across the state to say, this is what we want our kindergartners to learn. And they're not mincing words around like, there's a random symbol of the United States. Like, it talks about the Pledge of Allegiance is something that we are teaching our kindergartners. And I know philosophically there's a lot of things that we can debate. Are we following everything that the state puts out? Are we not? Are we having some internal measures that are just as important for us? But when we build some of our assessments, we also don't want to leave our students hanging out there at a disadvantage because somehow we've made local decisions that said we're not going to give them what students across the state are having as kind of a baseline educational experience. That's the whole intent of standards anyway, is to make sure that we're all progressing together. And there is very specific language in our model curriculum for kindergarten that includes the vocabulary that we're talking about on these assessments. So, we weigh these very heavily when we look at model curriculum, we look at standards, we look at what's appropriate, we look at our curricular tools, and, the team behind us, that's really the filter that they pass through is, so when we use words like community, is that appropriate? And sometimes we might say, that's a really tough word. But when it's in our standards and it's in our model curriculum, we can't just turn our back to it. We've got to figure out what's the best way to teach a 5-year-old what the concept of community is, and how do we best do that. Now, the assessment item is really to say, So how many kids might already know what this is? I mean, it talks specifically about responsibilities. I think Allison talked about responsibilities in here. And just to give you another example of what the model curriculum says is the expectation for learning in kindergarten is identify responsibilities at home and in the school and community and describe how individuals share those responsibilities to achieve common goals. And I know that that's a statement for teachers, but it's also the learning intention for students. So our teachers have been specifically trained to think, how do I take something that might be an adult language and work it through to get it down to students? And that's really when we start to see, well, if we have made those connections, then it should show up on an assessment item to see, are students being able to master the standards that are provided by the state for these grade levels? So that's where we get into how we've been very thoughtfully constructing these assessment items. It's not so much that it showed up in a purchased curriculum, but like we really do take a lot of time to wade through some of these curricular tool items and say, but this is really what we want to see. 6 questions is I think what the extent of that, because we really thought that the 6 there are focused on model curriculum and standards that are appropriate for trimester 1. Now, of course, there's always a ton of debate, and that's why we bring teachers into this conversation as well. That where we are, this is year 1 of our assessments for kindergarten. This is really the open dialogue to say, so can you collect this in a different manner? And I think that that's what I heard a lot of the kindergarten teachers say is, maybe we want to collect it in a different manner. This is the first time that we've ever administered questions to kindergartners for social studies. And so it is the feedback process is happening right now. So whereas we might have this as a draft, it is not where we expect to be after we've gone through a cycle of us delivering some of these assessments and the curriculum that goes along with them. So when teachers get this info and we say like, okay, so what happens when I pick the American flag or I don't pick the American flag, that becomes the opportunity for us to then say, so maybe we need to put up a couple more examples. We've got IB schools that have got flags in every single hallway. And so we really do want students to be able to recognize. I try to go back and think about how would this look if I was a kindergartner. Sometimes those flags look very similar unless you know what it is that you're looking for. So when you start thinking, I think you guys were saying, well, let's look at the stripes. Let's look at the stars.
What colors are
Yeah, what color? I think those are really powerful pieces. But how will we know unless the students are able to identify or not identify the symbols that we're looking for?
Okay, so it's been an impression, and one reason why I think we've voted on standardized curriculums in the past, and I've seen firsthand in the district, and some of this is before your time, where we've had students go through a grade level, they advance to the next grade level, and there's stuff that at that new grade level was sort of assumed that you got at the lower grade level that they never got. Okay? People weren't communicating with each other. Things weren't aligned. And it was problematic. And not that I care very much about the state report card, because the state report card, I think, is it's just gerrymandered. Okay? It doesn't help us in any regard. But I want to make sure that the assessments that we're asking our kids to do, not specifically to kindergarten, just overall, aren't falling in that same category. I mean, how are we using these? How long do they take? You hear, well, and our customers, our parents, a lot of our parents, come to us and say, too much testing, too much testing, too much testing. Well, I'm not sure they understand in context what really is a test. Again, is it part of a learning tool? I mean, so for example, and I still don't know this. Okay, do we ask this question twice, at the start of the year and at the end of the year? I mean, because I know a lot of assessments are built that way, or is this done one-on-one with our kids? And realistically, how long is it taking? Not with this specific, to give me good examples, but whether today or at some future point, I would like to have more information about that.
There's tests we do both ways. There's tests So there's some that are, you do a pre-test to get your baseline. Now, in kindergarten, I think that one of the discussions is, for the most part, they are tabula rasa. You can assume kindergarten tabula rasa. Now, not every kid, every question, but in terms of the bang for your buck of all of that investment of time, energy, et cetera, probably some items we can assume is zero. But for like the SLO tests, that's certainly, what do you know, with the, beginning, and then basically retest the same test at the end to measure, the difference. And then there's unit tests and that sort of thing that happen throughout, yes?
Yes. Yes.
To be honest, what you described, the dioramas, the models.
The models, yes.
To me, that's the assessment. You want to create a community, fuse classrooms, and talk about this larger community and this new community. And that to me is the exciting stuff that is just so powerful.
It is, and it's not an either or, it's an and. And I believe we should and do both, right? I should be able to do,
Yes.
create the project and have the conversation, and there were two classrooms that were, joined together, so you had all four of the adults that were there, that were giving instruction, so that you could see that there wasn't that, you're not my teacher, but so they were understanding how to function when they were blended into this classroom. But I keep saying it because it's true, and it's the conversation that we constantly have. It's not an either or. It's not just like we're assessing these skills, paper, pencil, and in a silent environment where kids are circling answers or bubbling in worksheets and not doing what some might describe as the more fun or more authentic ways to measure that understanding. It's both.
I'd just like for us to get either or instead. I think that maybe we can add in, some instead. That's all.
So, what I hope is not complicating this conversation is we had about 300 kindergarten teachers speak very passionately to us. Okay? And
Yeah.
I am hopeful that, and it seems like the staff, the teachers, some union representatives are working it out, okay? And I think we need to let that happen, okay? And we're not, I think
Amen.
it's inappropriate for us to second guess anything.
Right.
Yeah, so, but maybe let's start back at the KLA, okay? And we may not go as far as we want to tonight. And maybe it's disappointing that we're starting in the kindergarten session, but maybe this is where it starts. But okay, so this KLA stuff goes in. Does it get? Where does the data go? Do we look at it? Do our
Yes.
teachers look at it?
So, yes, we look at the results. Actually, today is Tuesday, so
Tuesday
my
feels like Friday.
days are starting to blend together. But so one of the questions, because we use part of the results for the reading status of students, and we also administer Dibbles next, one of the questions was, the two tests do measure slightly different things. How do the students perform looking at each tool? So is one saying that they're more prepared or more ready at the beginning of the school year than the other year, than the other assessment? So that is one way that we are looking with the data, and that data is being shared with the ELA lead teachers at each building, because they know the students more intimately. They administer one of the tests that we're comparing, to be able to say, does that make sense to you, was the actual question that I asked. Does it make sense that the student earned this score is above benchmark as defined by Dibbles, where they're looking at their ability to identify letters and identify the first sounds of words, compared to what's assessed on the language and literacy test, where they may not be on track? because it doesn't make sense to me, but I'd like to get your thoughts on it. So that's how we're using some of the results, or this in particular, is to say, so this is this external assessment you have shared, because they have, that they don't like to administer it, they don't find the results to be useful, but we do use them as part of the K-3 literacy measure. And comparing it to something else that they do feel really strongly about, that they do understand and believe the results of, how do those two things compare?
So what actions are taken as a result?
As a result of that conversation,
Of,
or?
you administer this test, and then you administer this other test, and you look at it and you see if this one, if this one makes sense in light of what, and then what's done?
So then-
What actions are taken after that?
So based on those results, we identify what additional support students might need. And so again, in the conversation that I had most recently with one of our buildings, we were looking at these students. And the teachers were going, well, yes, this student is receiving intervention in this area. So yes, this student is already in one of my groups. This one isn't yet because of observations from the classroom teacher, but we'll go back and look at them. So we use these assessments to go back and say, so are kids getting what they need? And to be very specific about what it is that they need. So it's not just, extra time looking at anything or having someone read aloud to them, but it's focusing on the skills that these assessments have said that they still need additional work on.
Okay, so for example, in one of the questions, you're asked, the child is asked to identify a picture of something with a sound. So there's like a cow, an egg, a bed, an ant. So if they don't, for whatever reason, they don't hear the A sound in ant, maybe that's what we would say, okay, let's work with them on that.
So it's something to keep in mind, right? Because it's their progress check. The teachers are going to continue to instruct. Actually, the first unit assessment focuses on, so the emphasis is on the letters C, O, and G.
Okay.
So they will continue to practice those letters and those sounds, and then they'll add in another one, and it's all done through characters and story and play. And then we look at performance over time around those skills. So let's just saying in the first test, a student was below benchmark because they weren't able to identify, they were only able to identify 4 out of the 6 sounds or 4 out of the 6 letters. Well, we're not going to do anything extreme right then at that time, right? But we'll be more attentive to it. So as we're asking questions as part of whole group instruction, we're going to touch base with that student as it comes up to see how they respond to the questions. But after the second progress check or the third progress check, if we don't see an improvement, then yes, we go in for more intensive support. But getting one question incorrect on one
right.
progress test does not necessarily
No, but I
mean
mean,
we're gonna have-
in an aggregate, if you notice
Yes.
a pattern or a trend of this
Absolutely.
child's not hearing the letter C.
then we know that something else needs to be done. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. So I think we've touched on kindergarten. We have an understanding about that one. Should we move on to grade 3?
Yeah, I would really like to know how long. I mean, what's the time commitment we're asking per student? I mean, so we hear too much testing, so I'd like to have sort of an answer of, if you're a kindergartner,
Time study?
yeah, I mean, how much time?
Okay.
And, okay, it doesn't have to be exact, but I'm just trying to, wrap my arms around it, okay?
Got it. So when we look at grade 3, we have our Ohio State tests that are required by the department. So students take tests in English language arts and in mathematics. There are actually 2 administrations of the English language arts test, and results on that test impact student promotion to the 4th grade. In grade 3, we're also required to administer a reading diagnostic test. Now, we do have some choice, so the district has some choice in what tests we use. So we have chosen Dibbles next. And it's also administered in kindergarten, first and second grade. So the benefit of that is that it's familiar to teachers. It's also familiar to students. So they know who the ELA lead teacher is. They know what it means to sit down and go through the probes. And it also allows us to monitor performance over time. So using the same tool, K to 3, and that familiarity lets us better identify.
Now, I assume it's not the same assessment at a third grade level than at a kindergarten level, right? The Dibbles itself progresses.
Correct. The skills that are
And
assessed
assumes that the student
changes
is
over
progressing.
time. Yes.
Do you find that it is reasonably predictive of success on the third grade reading guarantee? Or do any of what we use, are they predictive?
So we do have a tool that does project performance on the state test. My pause was that they are just that, they are projections. And so what I try to share with any staff member who will listen to me, or anyone that will listen to me, is that this is without any additional support or intervention or dynamic instruction. So, because we don't want to get stuck and to have people believe, well, that's what how you're projected to perform. So no matter what I do, I'm not going to be able to change
Amen.
that outcome. So
Kids tend to live down to our expectations.
yes.
Right.
So yes, have I seen some correlation? And I've also seen where it doesn't match because our kids and our students our teachers have gone above and beyond what was initially projected.
So grade 3, looking at the first document you gave us, it looks like there's 16 assessments for grade 3 because we also introduced MAP at that point.
We do introduce MAP. So in grade 3, we use MAP growth in the area of reading and mathematics. So we introduced that, I think it was in the year 13-14 school year. So my first year in the position as director.
So what would help me is if I got a better understanding of what Dibbles gives us that's different from MAP, or what each one gives us, and
That's why we do both.
yeah, why we do both. I mean, does one give us something that the other one doesn't, and then so therefore we do this?
So, yes, so Dibbles identifies or looks at the basic literacy skills. Kids will read one passage and they're assessed on their oral reading fluency, so they'll have to tell the assessor, some key facts or components about the passage that they've read. So it's usually, I think it's 1 or 2 passages, brief, and then that's the extent of the assessment. When we look at a tool like NWEA MAP, it assesses in multiple areas. So it looks at acquisition of vocabulary, reading informational text, and reading literary text. Another difference between the MAP test and Dibbles is that MAP is adaptive, so it is a computerized test.
Right.
So it changes or the questions shift based on how the students respond to it. And it is not based on a specific set of criteria for just third grade.
Right.
Where Dibbles it's a criterion-based test, it's just measuring these specific skills. Where in MAP, again, because it changes based on how students answer the questions. I could be a third grader that is exposed to questions at the 7th grade level
Yep.
because I am above
Yep.
those grade level expectations.
People often forget that reading informational text successfully is a very different skill set in many ways than reading
Stories.
reading
Fiction.
like
Right.
narrative or
Right.
fictional text differently. It's and in some grades, Bob, you two probably know which ones are which, are much heavier in informational text versus what's the other one?
Literary text.
Yeah,
Well,
literary
f-
text. You can
fourth
tell
grade,
eighth grade
right, is where you have to switch from learning to read to reading to learn, right?
Yes.
We would actually do
Exactly.
K to 2 is where you learn to read, and 3 and higher is
Oh,
where you
3
learn to
is
learn.
right.
Yeah, that's where you see the biggest shift. And it's also when we look at our curricular-based assessments, we have that change from Super Kids to the program of Ready Gen. It does become more intense. The passages are longer. There's an expectation of more individualized reading, so less reading aloud by the adult and more that the student has to do on their own. So another benefit of NWEA MAP is that it serves multiple purposes, and So it allows us to put our results into context, so we can look at performance over time. Again, for those who are well advanced, it'll allow us to know and understand that, because we can tell by their performance. It's also an approved screener for gifted identification, which is awesome when we think about the district's efforts for equity and access. So if, we know that a portion of our population does not necessarily start on the very first day of school, so being able to give a test like MAP that is approved for gifted screening, but over the school year allows us to catch kids that may not be caught otherwise. And it measures achievement and growth. So again, I may not be performing with my typical peers based on the norming information, but I am able to see how much I've grown from one administration to another administration.
When it comes to identifying giftedness, using MAP to identify giftedness, is there an accepted threshold at each grade level that is sort of the universal threshold for giftedness? Or is that a district number that we select?
No, it's state mandated.
It is state mandated.
You are.
So students who perform, when we're talking about academic ability with the tests that are, and there is a specific list that's provided by the Ohio Department of Education that says, these are the tools that you can use to identify. For academic ability, students have to perform in the 95th percentile or higher in order to be identified as gifted in that particular area. So that's
Okay.
not a district decision, that is a state decision, and it can vary from state to state.
And year to year,
Yes.
if it's
It is
95th
reviewed.
percent, if it's a
Correct,
percentile.
because it's norm reference,
Yes.
so that's in
So then, but then
comparison to others.
placement decisions in terms of advanced courses, et cetera, that would be an in-house decision unless we were serving giftedness by offering an advanced course, yes.
But that is still also determined by the department, so they do identify different ways that we can
Serve
define
yes.
service,
Got it.
correct. Correct.
Yep.
But then we do have some options at the local level of what that, under the department's parameters, what that service looks like.
And they review that every so many years. In fact, the last, year or two, they did a revision.
Right,
of
we had
that.
revisions last year,
Yep.
and then it was like we started the school year, and I think they looked again and are possibly making some additional revisions based on the feedback that they received. They being the Department of Education. So when we look at our curricular-based assessments, the primary tool that we use is ReadyGen, and again, there are 4 tests that we ask teachers to administer to students over the course of the year.
And that's part of the curriculum, so it's large unit chunks or multiple units?
Yes, it would be multiple lessons, or reflect multiple lessons. So again, there are only 4. The way that the tests are designed, the kids usually receive one reading passage, informational text, where they will respond to different questions, some multiple choice, some constructive response questions. Then there's a second passage that they have to read, they do the same thing. And then there's a third part where students are given a prompt, and they have to write out their own response. In mathematics, so kindergarten through 5th grade, the primary tool is math expressions. So again, there are 2 tests for the first trimester, 2 tests in the second trimester, and 3 in the third trimester. So I hear you would like to know times or approximate times for each one of those tests. And that is something that we can monitor. It is not a number that I have on the ready because it can vary, and these are not timed tests. So I understand the purpose of why you want to better understand it, given the questions or the concerns that have been raised. But it isn't one of those data points that I have at the ready, because we might have some students who, will take the test over a couple of days, and then some who will finish up in 20 minutes. It really depends, so I'll work on that piece.
Well, I think for some clarity, we're not, I don't think, without knowing the value, it's hard for me to say that there's too many. Okay? It seems like there's too many. realistically, I think that's what the community is saying. I don't think anybody's asking you to cut the number of tests in half. I mean, that's not why we're here. We're just trying to learn what we're doing. I mean, that's really all, I mean, that's what this is all about.
And we are open
Because
to
we're
share.
worried and we're
Right.
concerned, yeah.
That's one of the things, if, you remember from the beginning, the intention is for this to be a transparent process. Like, it's not a secret. We are on the same path and we have the same want. So we do go through a regular process of getting feedback from our classroom teachers, from our curricular specialists. So, yeah, we're definitely open to making adjustments.
And I think too, also the board and the community wants to make sure that that balance is there, that we're not utilizing the majority of our classroom time on assessments. I think that's important. So we showing that, many of these tests may be a formative assessment. Many of these, like Dibbles, or some that our teachers said, you know what, we don't have to administer that, but I really like the information that Dibbles provides for us. Then people in the community knows that, well, we don't have to give it, but our teachers chose that test because of the data that they received. So I like the way we've highlighted in various colors when you did on the assessment page to show that those are some tests that we decided, our teachers decided that that information gives us some good data points. But to balance what the kindergarten teacher said and others, we don't want to create a culture or promote a culture that it's all about testing. We want to make sure the culture is about making sure we understand what our kids, what they may be missing, and how do we fill in those gaps with activities, with varied activities, and that we're not utilizing a whole bunch of time to do that. And I think that's that balance that Bob and the curriculum team are trying to make sure that we get to. And to your point, and what Allison stated, that making sure that board have an understanding. And if we need to do something different, we're talking about that with our community and with our teachers, what that looks like. I mean, we know that our kindergartners, teachers, one painted a picture, I said, with the team, with the one teacher said the first few days we had, how many tests, when you think about it, it was like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of assessments. But when you look at it and say, okay, it may have been 3 questions. Then when you dig, it may not be as much, but still, to a kindergarten teacher that may have to, in her mind, she's taken away the time that she wants to do this creative lesson because of this mandate. That's the piece that we want to take away. So we want it to be a clear understanding. I know we were talking about, Jim and I were saying, you know what, maybe even for the board, just adding a column to this about the time. How much time?
The
That's
length of time it
Yeah,
takes,
yeah,
yeah, sure.
how much time on a test, that can give you some context. And as Allison stated, for some kids, it may take more time than others. But if we know that a test is a quick Dibbles, is 5 minutes, man, we just add that column, But we want to get to this balance, that we are not a organization, a district that is fixated on assessments. We want to make sure that we have a clear understanding of what our kids need to know. How do we know that they've learned it? What if we do if they don't? And what do we do with those kids that already know it? And we don't want them sitting in the classrooms being bored, because we know what can happen there. So finding that balance, I think is where we all are trying to make sure we get to.
And I was thinking about curriculum and how, if you have an end of unit something, whatever it is, whatever you call it, how many, test is short, assessment has too many syllables. You don't want to go crashing into the next chapter of your curriculum until you have a sense that the kids are with you.
Yes.
Because otherwise you're leaving them behind.
Then you're leaving them behind. And so those
Your
little-
pacing
yeah.
guide should incorporate some wiggle room on that. But you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and then you have to have extension activities ready for the kids who are ready.
Right, right. So the ones who are done with this chapter get to do something else that's more interesting while you make sure that everybody else has caught up.
So, I think there's another issue here too. And without naming names, I went to a school, not Heights, that, very elite local school. Parents had to spend a significant amount of money they didn't have to send me there. But there were teachers there at the time, and granted, this is 50-some years ago, okay, that really didn't follow a curriculum, okay? I ended up in a good place, okay, so I'm not gonna go there, but I saw my kids at Heights, though, deal with some teachers who were way off pacing, way off pacing. I mean, things where you should have had 3 books consumed with multiple papers consumed by,
My
around
son's had the
Christmas time,
same,
okay?
my son's had the same problem.
and you have like a teacher or 2 or 3, oh, well, we're not quite ready for the test yet. It's like, well, why aren't we ready for the test? Because we've been ready for the test a month ago, okay? And so, what do we do as an intervention for the teacher to make sure that we're on track? I mean, there's a lot of teachers out there, and we've got scores of great ones, okay? But they're on their own path, okay? And maybe that's okay for some things, but we have some that are on a path that's not healthy for our kids. And that's where I want to make sure that there's this, I mean, I don't know where this could be used as a check and balance, if it should or if it shouldn't, but is it? I mean, how do our building leaders, fix this?
Yeah. And I think that's why we got to strategic goal 2. I mean, we know strategic goal 1, educational outcomes, proficiency, mastery. We want to make sure our kids got there. But even 2, the making sure that every kid is that graduates and is ready. I mean, that's important. So we think about the opportunities that we provide for learning, and that approach to learning. I think that's important. We want to make sure that our kids are ready. We have to make sure of that. And then how that happens and how we create those powerful opportunities can be had in a multiple of ways. And I think Allison described the one when you had these kids building this community. I mean, you go to some of the things that we see in these classrooms. It is amazing. We just had the Great Lakes Science Center just gave all of our elementary schools science kits, and they're going to be filming some amazing things. I mean, gosh, you're talking about hands-on learning and how to make that powerful. That's exactly what we want to see more of. But we want to make sure, too, our kids come to that learning with some basic skills and basic knowledge, too, And I think, again, as we keep talking about, the balance of that is important.
And one of the things that is helping, Jim, I think, address the problem that you described is we have not had a major curriculum overhaul from the state in a few years. They switched a little bit in the sciences not too long ago, but since they've sort of settled in more or less to a K-12 curriculum for all of the subjects, that has helped a lot. And now you get teachers, who if you don't drop teachers in this class this year and then move them to a different grade next year, and we don't do a whole lot of that, which is great. It gives your staff an opportunity to develop a depth of knowledge, not only of what they're studying, but also a comfort with the pacing that needs to go through. So for instance, in 8th grade, a first-year teacher might not make it all the way through Reconstruction, but they better make it through the Civil War. And next year they'll make it through Reconstruction. So you get a comfort with the rhythm of the course once teachers have a chance to sort of get in there and swim around for a few years.
Just better hope that when that kid progresses on to the 9th grade, they're not responsible for knowing.
Because that's how our kids do end up with gaps.
Exactly. So
Right,
that's
and
where
so we
that.
need to make sure that there is continuity from grade to grade and that there aren't bits
And that
missing.
people are, that they are faithful to the graded course of study.
And so one of the ways that we are working to do the monitoring that you're speaking about is through these formal assessments. So these are using these unit assessments at certain periods of time to measure specific skills. Allows us to say, hey, you know what? They were supposed to cover this particular topic. Doesn't look like the kids quite got it. And so then the teacher who has them in that following year is aware of that.
And can play a little catch-up.
Yes, and can play a little catch up. And just like we're asking teachers to collect multiple data points, we're doing the same thing. So these tests, the information that we're gleaning is not the only way that we are measuring or determining whether or not students have got it. Again, data is anything that provides evidence of student learning or impact of instruction. So we also participate in walkthroughs, very formal walkthroughs where we're all there as a team and, we ask the building, what do you want us to look for? And then informally, hey, I just stopped in. Can I see what's happening? Do you mind if I sit in the back of the classroom? Or hey, can I actually participate? Can I co-teach with you? So our curriculum specialists do that all of the time. Not just one point, we're looking at multiple points.
Okay, so I think I heard something, I just want to reiterate it, that I find pretty interesting. So hypothetically, the student, is taking math in one grade level. Whatever happens, you have a long-term sub in that class, that student doesn't get the whole curriculum. So the next year in the next grade, does the teacher actually have something in front of them to realize, hey, look, this was sort of the end of the year assessment for this particular child, and they missed half of it?
It's very hard to do.
It is very hard to do, but we are working to make that happen. So again, by focusing on a select set of assessments, we house a majority of them in our data system that's called Illuminate Ed. We are able to say, or as the kids move up, this is how they performed on these skills and standards. Now, it's not as fine-tuned as I would like it to be, but that is one of the primary reasons that we focused on having the information in one centralized location, and adopting, this tool of Illuminate Ed so that information would be there and would be accessible.
And the challenge is that next year in Mr. Goss's class, there will be kids who were in that class, but they'll be blended with kids who were not. And so it's very hard to differentiate. Yes, you may know that Mr. Heinz's class didn't finish Reconstruction, but these other kids did. And so it's really hard to differentiate and keep things moving. And by the way, adding another complication, next year's teacher only has 180 days to teach the things that's on their evaluation.
Okay, that's good. Okay.
So the last grade level, grade 6, so again, Ohio State test. They are required to take the English Language Arts test and the mathematics test, and there is just one administration of both of those tests, and that occurs in the spring. At the 6th grade level, we also administer the Terra Nova and InView, and this comes from a requirement at the state level that says districts have to provide whole grade screening in the areas of cognitive ability and academic ability in math and reading and in creative thinking. We have to do that once during the kindergarten to 2nd grade band and then once during the 3rd and 6th grade band. So we meet that requirement by administering Terra Nova and InView in grade 2 at the end of the year, and then again at the beginning of the year in grade 6. So the Terra Nova is used to identify academic ability across 4 content areas: math, reading, social studies, and science. And the InView is used to identify superior cognitive abilities. And again, just like with in WEA MAP and how it's used as a gifted screener, that whole grade level screening is especially beneficial for the more mobile members of our school community, because they may not have been here at the end of the 2nd grade to participate in the whole grade level screening, and we're able to see if they have those skills at the beginning of 6th grade. So we also assess it in WEA MAP, and the benefits of this test are the same for 6th grade as they are in 3rd grade. And then when we look at our curricular-based assessments, the primary tool for English Language Arts is Literature by Pearson, just like in 3rd grade, 4 tests for the school year. And then in Social Studies, we use the tool TCI History Alive that Karen Bauer-Blazer has shared excerpts with you. There are 2 tests that are administered in the 1st quarter and the last quarter of the school year, and then 1 test each in quarters 2 and quarter 3. And you have examples of one of those units in your packet. And then when we look at mathematics and science, so Big Ideas is the tool that's used in grades 6 through high school Algebra 2. And Science Fusion is used K-8. In our science classes, 2 tests in quarters 1 and 3, and then 3 tests for quarters 2 and 4. And then you have again, the timeline for Science Fusion with 1 test in the first quarter and the third quarter, and 2 in the second and the fourth. So that actually concludes our presentation. The goal was to share with you what we're assessing, and to give you some idea of why we're assessing and how we're using the information. And then you've had your specific examples for kindergarten 3, grade 3 and grade 6.
So without focusing on the kindergarten or anything else, but you were gonna add another column for this?
Yes,
Or-
my suggestion is we just add another column to our testing calendar that would just kind of give us the estimated time that these tests take, if we know them. Like some of them we saw in the packet, it would take 10 to 15 minutes. So I think, and then they have the board will have one document they can look at.
I have that
Knowing
now.
that some of them we may not have, but I think that can, that would be helpful. You guys?
Yeah.
So-
Yes,
yeah,
thank you.
And then with just pulling one grade level, I mean, and let's just pick grade 3, this is sort of like middle.
Okay.
Just a column of why is it important?
Do we want, for some of the lower ones, lower grades, these are the tests that are given, if they're one-on-one, that sort of thing too, because I think that's an important piece of information in terms of what it does to instructional time.
So if you.
We're adding columns and columns and columns.
Right, well, if you go, Allison, if you can go back to the kindergarten, I think it's did you have the list of tests? Okay, so that one, so you see where the ones in green, so if you take away the ones in greens that the district decided, and then you take away the purple that are the curriculum assessments, right? Then the only test that we really have, it would be the KRA. Right, okay, so we can put, maybe a note there to kind of, again, to tell you the times, but, I think it's important to say that, in what year, Allison, was it that we revised this even more? We took some, was it
I actually printed up the calendars from
15,
15, 16 to 16, 17.
Yeah.
I believe it was in it was 17, 18 that the state dropped some of the diagnostic tests.
But it was one year that we had a big meeting,
did.
and we went through and we took away a lot of them based, was 15, 16, or 16, 17. But I think that's important. If you put it in this spec, you see how many tests that are actually given in kindergarten, and put those times on there. To know that the ones in purple are the ones that we're giving because we have a curriculum. And those are the ones that are assessed to our curriculum. And those are the ones, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the teachers were not used to giving prior to us adopting even Super Kids, because we didn't have a reading program.
Right, so
we.
all those pink assessments came in with
Exactly.
the Super Kids.
With all the different curriculums and the
and the
math expression. So
math
we
expression,
decided, when the district decided that we were going to get a curriculum, it added some assessments. And these are the ones that the teacher said, oh my gosh, it's too much, because they're not used to
Yeah,
these
so it's like
numbers.
it's growing, so we'll
right.
decide
Ex-
together that
Right.
some of these we may not do next year.
Yeah, that's the next conversation that Allison and curriculum team are having, like, which of these assessments can we get this data in a different way? Yeah.
Fairly reasonable.
So I think, to your point, you want now the third grade, you're suggesting that we just take this same format and just put the third grade?
Yeah, I'm just trying to
Okay.
get a sense
The sense
of
of-
why some of these things are,
Yeah.
relevant and important. And instead of doing it through, you've got hard lines here. I mean,
Yeah.
let's just focus on third grade.
Allison,
Yes,
Go ahead.
okay, the math test, the reading, math, and science.
yes.
Now, you said the green indicate that it's state mandated.
The green is actually not
Oh,
mandated.
okay, well, that answers my
So it's not required, but it is an external assessment that we choose to administer
see.
because of some of the benefits of it.
Okay, thank you.
And there are ties to state requirements, so I can see why you would think that, like, for example, with MAP, it is an approved test for gifted screening as defined by the Department of Education.
I
So
see.
it's not
So it meets
required.
more than one, it
Yes.
serves more than one purpose.
Yes.
Thank you.
Wow, nice job again.
Yes, thank you very much.
For laying it
Thank you
out
very,
this
very
way
much.
for the board, and I think this was a good format to put it
Yeah,
in.
Yeah,
thank you.
Okay,
Great.
all right.
Sorry we asked 1 million questions, but it was really helpful.
Trying to share.
Sharing is caring.
We appreciate that.
Are you a kindergarten teacher at heart?
No, I'm certainly not.
Dad loves when
nearly
he
nice
does. Love when Dad gets to talk, teacher.
Okay, so jumping back on the business services item or a phase two sort of update.
Yep.
So, before Capital Conference, we all had the opportunity to sort of individually and sort of as groups, walk through the building. Some of us talked to some of the architects. I thought it was incredibly valuable, I think, one-on-one, but we haven't had a really good public conversation about it, and that's what I'd like to occur right now. So, we have, Jody and Malia that attended, sort of like the
Right back.
executive committee or the executive, what do we call this? Is it the executive?
It's executive committee.
The executive committee that's sort of leading this. I think we were all wanting to jump in and join that meeting, specifically Beverly, I know. But I wanted to have us have the opportunity to sort of hear from you guys, what you thought, what your observations were. I mean, we heading in the right direction? Are we tackling all these things? Hopefully Dan's gonna be back.
I
in
know,
a
I'm like,
second.
Dan, one of the reasons we're having this conversation is to update you.
He'll come
So-
back.
Yeah, and what we were planning to do was read out at least the discussion we had with the architects after we all did the walkthroughs and kind of trying to put together a framework or a structure for how we want to continue or look at phase two of the facilities project. And when we say phase two, I want to remind everybody that phase one was the high school and the middle schools. And then phase two is what do we do with the elementary schools? And yes, Dan is back, so,
Perfect, your vamp was the exact right length.
yes.
Yes,
No, you
Yes.
didn't.
we're vamping for you.
Yeah. So what we talked about was, the first thing that we feel we need to do, and Malia, jump in if, I forget something.
I'm looking
but-
at my notes.
Yeah. We felt like we needed to remind the community, why we need to look at our facilities. What are the issues with, the elementary schools? And, we did have an original facilities plan which called for the closing of 2 of our elementary schools. And the 2 at the time, were Noble and Fairfax. And we feel that we need to reevaluate that old plan, and that's another thing we need to update the community on, is why would we evaluate the plan? And the main reason is the plan is, almost 10 years old, and some things have changed. And 2 of us at this table sat on the facilities committee, and Malia also was a part of one of the iterations of the facilities committees. And, there were things that, some of the information that was changing, or we just felt it was time to look at it again.
Well, some of the operating assumptions from back then have changed.
True, absolutely true. So we wanted to take a look at that, and that the goal is to set sometime within probably the next 5 or 6 months, some kind of community meeting to discuss, all of those items. Some of the other things that we talked about are, desired outcomes. Why would we look at facilities? Why do we want to, tackle phase two? And the first thing is to make sure that our facilities support our educational needs. The second thing would be to reduce facilities costs. And the third thing would be, to make sure that on paper and according to the state, our facility square footage exceeds our needs. So we need to first validate that that's actually even true. So some of the cost savings that we want to look at is just, we can evaluate class size, and our target size is anywhere from 20 to 25, and we kind of think the sweet spot is around 22 students. This was information we got from Educational Services. So can we close 1, 2, or even 3 elementary schools? Is 3 too many? Is 1 the right number? Is 2 the right number? We don't even know. So we need to look at some average costs, so, not picking on any particular school right now, but we know that there are, average costs that we can look at and average square footage that, we need to make sure that we have to, we don't want class sizes to bump up too incredibly well. So one of the things we're looking at is, if a class size, needs to be 900 square feet for grades 1 through 12, do we have enough facilities, or how many elementary schools or square footage do we need that would give us that? And if, a kindergarten requires 1,200 square feet, so, do we have the right capacity or over capacity or under capacity? And according to OFCC, we have over capacity in some of these grades. That's why we need to look at what would give us the best educational outcomes, give us the right capacity, but also not be costing us more money than we should probably be spending. Third thing we want to look at is pre-K options and what that looks like. I know we had been on a path of putting pre-Ks in every building, and we found out that due to some of the structures, that's not really possible. And we've looked at, potentially looking at a model of centralizing pre-K. So we need to figure out, what that looks like. Is that, what are our options if we decide to go that route, and how we repurpose an existing facility for that. Another thing that we want to look at is the safety and security of our schools and our elementary schools, and looking at that as far as, the existing structures and building design and what might need to change. We also want to look at long-term maintenance costs. Some of, it may turn out that a building or two are significantly more expensive because of where they are, and that's something that we need to consider as well as we're looking at facilities. And also, I know, Jim, you've mentioned that we want to look at the ability to add air conditioning, with the rising heat that we had in the beginning of the school year. That was a significant issue that, kids can't learn if they're sitting in 100-degree classrooms. And some of our buildings would be easier to air condition than others. And just what is the cost to do that? And we know the footprint buildings are air conditioned, but they don't necessarily have windows in all their classrooms, and they don't have walls. So it's going to be a give and take as we're looking at some of this. And then we also want to look at, operational costs and busing costs. And, if you take an elementary school out, that's going to increase busing. It might decrease, operation costs. But what's that give and take, and how do we make a decision based on that? And then, of course, our we haven't looked at population maps in a long time, the heat maps that were done. So where are our students living in the district? Where are, large pockets of students versus, fewer students? And then we have the discussion of, or we will have to have a discussion about the bus depot. Currently our bus depot is in what was originally thought to be a temporary spot. What do we have to do if we wanted to make it a permanent spot? Is that even possible? Or what do we want to do, or how much is it going to cost if we decide to move the bus depot back, which was, it was here at the Board of Education? And what costs we might be facing at that? And, what are the conveniences and inconveniences for having it located near the bus garage? And also, we need to have certain conversations with the city, because we were in a temporary situation with Cleveland Heights. We don't know that they would even allow us to make that permanent. But then also, what are the implications for University Heights moving the bus depot back? Do they even want it back? So will there be issues there? And then also, we're looking at, how much space is required for the Board of Education, and we have some dependencies of the two buildings where, the heat for the Board of Education is actually conducted out of Wiley right now. So when we close Wiley, how are we going to heat the Board of Education, or what are we going to do there? And, even should the board stay in this location? Maybe the board should move into one of our other schools if we have capacity to do that, if we're looking at closing things. Also, we need to make sure we have the appropriate spaces in our schools for the wraparound services that we decided to implement in, the last school year. We're trying to get that program up and running, and obviously, that will take some space to make sure that we're doing that. Also, we need to consider our alternative programs. We added the middle school alternative program last year. If we decide to keep that, we may need additional space for that. I hear that those programs are growing. And also, CTE is using Delisle, and, there's some spaces there and programs that are growing as well, and as well as, I believe, the credit union is located at Delisle. So there's a lot of different moving pieces that we're trying to look at, and I think that's a pretty good summary of what we've been covering.
You hit everything on my notes.
Yeah,
I'm trying to see if there's anything else, and I don't think so.
captured it all.
There are a
Good.
lot.
There was a good meeting.
There are a million moving parts, and any one decision will affect the 999,999 remaining moving parts. So it's going to require a lot of give and take, and it won't be possible to please everybody. We know that going into it. But we do have to figure out what is the best balance with educational programming taking precedence and then expense of running the district taking second place. So that's sort of like the grand scheme of things.
We also wanted to make sure too, Board, that we had some consistency of the board member who is going to accompany the district person to some meetings.
Yes.
We thought
Yes.
that was important, that there were some meetings with the
cities.
with the cities, and that we're not sending different board members, but a member of
Right.
the team.
And thank you, Malia, for agreeing to do that.
Yes, along with George Peckett and someone from VAA. So we wanted to make sure we can memorialize every decision from here on out and not have any
And not lose
verbal,
things.
yeah,
Yeah.
and not list
Right,
things. So it's a
right.
complete understanding moving
Right.
forward.
And once we decide what, criteria we're looking at, we want to look at that in a consistent way.
Yeah.
That was one of the big things that came out of the meeting that we had last Friday.
And I think our next meeting is December 15th? 14th.
14th,
December
thank you.
14th, yeah.
And then, one of the other things I don't want to forget that we did talk about also that should be one of the criteria if we decide to close something is what opportunity does that particular building have for repurposing? I'm a firm believer that one of the things that people get really concerned about when we talk about closing a building is what's going to happen to it? Because nobody wants the empty building left in their neighborhood, but if the building might have a different purpose that is attractive or interesting or good for the neighborhood, I think that that helps people accept that that change is coming. I
Okay.
think that wraps up what we talked about in an hour and a half. That was kind of
It
the
was a very full
Cliff
meeting.
Notes version.
Okay, I got a bunch of things to kind of, great comments, but I think part of you guys going out and sort of getting more into the weeds gives you guys the ability to do that and then bring it back to us so we can, give feedback, comments, express concerns, so we're all on the same page. A couple things I want to reiterate. I want to make sure that the community is understanding is, I think whatever we do, we want to try to keep this at a cost neutral.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
this is not looking at an exercise where we are going to be spending a lot of money to shrink or something.
Right,
Okay, I
right.
think we need to keep that in mind. I also think we need to keep in mind if it turns out that we do need to close some buildings, and I think just from, I think we all sort of feel like we have to. When you look at just the data, at least that's what the data that it seems like we need to be looking at. If we're closing a building, what are we giving back to the community? Because a lot of times, something gets torn away from a community, but nobody gets anything in return. So really, what is that and what is the argument? I mean, does it mean that we're going to the voters for a less bond issue? Does it mean that we can truly offer pre-K? So that's sort of a thought we need to.
Addition through subtraction.
Right, thank you.
Right.
part of this is also trying to figure out what we're dealing with Wiley. So, I mean, we know that the city of University Heights, it is an attractive space for the city of University Heights, either for redevelopment, for use. I mean, there's no deal on the table, but we know that there is, I mean, from their conversations with us in joint meetings, they've expressed a desire to be interested in that property or some property in University Heights. So I'm real kind of curious to see where that leaves Garrity and Wiley, board offices. So it would be interesting to see what kind of scenarios that we could run in that regard, and also where that fits in with sort of our desire to relook at our preschool programs. Because I think there's this preschool committee that you would like to kind of get rocking and rolling.
Rocking and rolling, yes, yes,
And before you leave,
yes. Yes.
well, really where I mean, we know we've got buildings that we cannot put preschool in. We have we've got some great buildings. We are doing preschool, like look at Garrity. I mean, can we offer, maybe a unified preschool, a centralized preschool,
Right.
or a different kind of preschool? I mean, so we need to just sort of look at that. I mean, make sure where that fits in. When it comes to the bus depot, it seems to me, instead of just like, what do we do? Logically, I mean, I think there's three choices for that, and I don't want to. I think we need to sort of look at it. It's kind of obvious. Buses move back here, they stay where they're at, or possibly use Delisle. So what's the deal with that? I mean, there's a piece of property there. It's centralized. I mean, maybe consider it. So I think this is something that.
Due diligence.
Yeah, I mean, it may immediately get ruled out, and I'm okay with that, but I'd
Yeah.
like people to
Yeah.
just sort of at least give it a little bit of thought.
Well, I think there's three options with the buses. They either come back here, they stay where they are, or they go somewhere else. I don't think you can really
Right.
name any one spot right
Okay.
now, but,
Good point.
I
Good.
mean,
A lot of this process is going to be traveling down roads, just doing our due diligence. That's, I think, a lot of what we'll be doing is ruling things out for the sake of putting the time in and investigating.
And to your point, I know I've asked George to give VAA the floor plans for this building, Delisle, and Garrity, so everyone have a complete understanding of what spaces, how it's been utilized, if we have to move space, then where, to your point. To
Right.
make sure we're doing a thorough assessment of all spaces, so you can rule things out.
And one thing that came out of our meeting is that we're going to be asking each building principal to actually name current use of every space on their floor plan, because
Yes.
we know that the floor plans show this thing, but when you walk through, it's actually some other thing. So we're going to try to capture a better drawing of what's actually being used in what way, so
Good
that
example
will
is
help us.
Oxford. So Oxford's floor plans do not show the renovation that was done a few years ago, when they have this innovative space on it. So the floor plans don't show that. So we needed to make sure that VAA has an accurate representation of how those buildings are being used.
yep.
So, I mean, I really like to hear averaging buildings. Okay, so this is sort of like the average cost. I would encourage, as you kind of go through this exercise, you also treat the busing. Busing really is very complicated, but we know we got a set busing cost. Maybe for the time being, until we actually maybe narrow down some buildings, you just sort of use an average cost for busing. I mean, I think that's going to simplify things a fair lot. Now, we may get pushback from staff, and if we get pushback from staff, rightly so, then maybe that's not the path we go. Maybe there needs to be another thought. And then OFSC, their requirements. So at Capitol Conference, a number of districts were actually talking about how they realized they were so far down on the list, they pretty much ignored anything that they had to say. So, I mean, we're pretty far down on the list. And they keep on
We're not gonna see
promising
any of that
money
money.
that we know is likely not going to be here. So I think from a realistic perspective, maybe we should look at this first without worrying about the OFSC requirements, and then look at the requirements, after we start narrowing things down, and then sort of do a filter of what it would be like.
Yeah, and that was the direction we gave VAA this past week. We said, we don't want to make any decisions based solely on OFCC information. We would, if there's potential money to be had, we wouldn't want to walk away from that without making an intentional decision to do that, but we don't want to base plans trying to chase dollars that we know are probably unlikely to ever be seen.
And the reality is that our internal expectations of space use are better than the OFCC. Those are bare minimums.
Right.
And, a fair number of our classrooms are larger. We have dedicated music rooms and art rooms and computer labs and library, things which are not mandated. So in that sense, we're not going to reduce our standards to OFCC.
Right.
Because that's not who we are.
Right, and we're not going to do things like, and we as a board have already done some things like in the middle school. We chose not to sprinkle the building because it did not impact any opportunity to save life. All it did was protect property, and it didn't lower our insurance rates. So
Chewed
at
up
that
a lot of
point,
money.
why would we spend $1 million that we could spend in so many better ways for educational outcomes? So we did tell VAA that that's the direction that we would like this process to go. We're not going to chase OFCC money that we're unlikely to ever see.
So I think there's an end game here. So I think our goal is at the end of the school year, hopefully before that, is to have some pretty solid scenarios and a pretty solid direction of what we feel is pretty good, without, for example, naming a particular building or two or three.
Just naming like
Yeah.
1, 2, or 3 is the right number.
Well, I think.
Is that what you're looking for?
Well, I think that makes sense. I think there needs to be a community process that we bolt onto this, that we need to get the community to understand
Absolutely.
what the
yeah.
value is. So for example, a real simple word, okay, one building, okay?
Right,
We get this amount of savings, but we get preschool, we move an office, we put the busing, we have a good scenario. Maybe we have a couple other scenarios, okay? I think there needs to be a time where we pause, get the community's feedback, get a
Yep.
better sense of what it is, and understand why we're thinking this way. Again, without naming a building, because at that point it becomes really personal to people.
right.
I think you need to look at the whole picture.
Right, and I think there's also a lot of what, I was calling climate building with our community to understand why and what this could do for educational outcomes, as well as what could it do to maybe reduce costs.
Well, it comes down to right sizing. The issue here is, when you look at the amount of square feet we have and the amount of kids that we teach, it is just too much. Okay, it's too much. And
We have an obligation to be more efficient
Yeah,
we need to find a way to do that.
absolutely.
and right-sizing to our standard, as Molly
Correct.
was
Yeah.
Right.
talking about the other day. And I just wanted to point out, because, it's the first time that we've used the number 3. And so, in addition to, we're not talking about specific buildings, I just wanted to remind people that, Wiley is in play. So I don't want people to think that we've gone from this idea of closing 2 elementary schools to closing 3 elementary schools. That Wiley is conceivably among that 3.
Yeah, I was just throwing a number out.
No, I
Because
know.
until we
Right.
really get a better sense of what these averages are,
I just don't want people, this is the sort of conversation, the sort of topic that gets people hypersensitive
Yeah.
for good reasons, because we are so attached to our schools.
And I think too, to add to that, if we just take our community back to strategic goal 5, operational resources, finances, technology, facilities, the
Right.
district has a necessary finance and infrastructure to provide outstanding 21st century education. So we're doing just that with this
Right,
process.
right.
So we're not straying away from anything that we're already we're doing, so we're just highlighting that through this process.
Well, the community is also thinking about this, because, we all get emails from,
Oh, yeah.
from people, and, we get emails with a configuration. This is what you should do to Wiley, this is what you should do
Yes,
to
we
this.
get
This
samples.
is what you should do to that. And, we're being a little proactive here, okay? I mean,
Right.
we are having these conversations, and that's,
Right. And actually, I love the ideas. Somebody might come up with the best idea that, nobody else has thought of. So if people have ideas, I would love to hear them. Absolutely.
well, there's not gonna be a best idea. I
Well,
mean, I think we know this.
Right.
There's
There
gonna
won't
be a
be a best idea.
series
There will
of
be
compromises that are gonna be made, and it's gonna be at the cost of saving some money. I mean, our levy burden is pretty high. And if we're operating with more than what we need, we do have the fiduciary responsibility to figure out a solution for that.
And I also, for what it's worth, I also see these decisions as being, as including our host cities. I think that those Cleveland Heights
absolutely.
and University Heights are such important partners in this, because this is incorporated in our shared vision of our shared community. Economically, educationally, culturally, so, again, just for the sake of putting it out there and having it be on record.
absolutely.
Anything else to add? You guys have any other thoughts?
No, I loved the opportunity of walking through those buildings. What a joy. You see the variety of lessons going on throughout, and all of the decorations and the different spaces, and it was an exciting few hours. It was really a lot of fun.
So, to tack on to that, we've had these capstone projects that, we were invited to. And I really, really had a fun time at Garrity. We had second graders explaining, reading. Oh my God, they're good readers. I just am absolutely, and presenters. And they had books and pictures and a little art thing going on, and excitement. That was just
Yeah.
thrilled, so.
At Boulevard today, I got to see lots of fourth grade animal dioramas and, how is your animal likely to be affected by climate change? And so they were, each child had a different animal, but they created communities, so there were multiple animals in each diorama. And, they had investigated the adaptations of their animals to their current climate and their current locale, and then they had sort of thought about potential changes and what would happen. Would they have to move to someplace else? Would they run out of food? All these things. It was terrific. It was
That's a
very
great
exciting.
example of STEM.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it was
Yeah.
terrific. Absolutely
Yeah.
terrific.
Good for them.
Yeah, every time I get to go into a building and see that kind of stuff, it reminds me of why I ran.
I
It's
was-
just,
Yep.
yeah, great
Yep.
stuff.
Okay, any other thoughts, comments to share? Do I,
I had a little tiny bit of thinking after the Fairfax Dancing Classrooms presentation. I know it's completely off topic. That was adorable. All the fifth graders did 10 weeks of ballroom dancing. But I was thinking about how do we as a district try to include and embrace the children who may feel uncomfortable in a social structure which is purely binary, which ballroom dancing is. And we know that at the high school and at the middle school, there are some students who are trying to figure out how they fit in the world. And so I was thinking about this, and the Ginger Rogers quote about how she had to learn and dance all the same steps as Fred Astaire, only in high heels and backwards, made me think that perhaps, I don't know if within the structure of this program, there's a way for children to choose whether they are the lady or the gentleman, or if there's a way for everybody to switch and see how it feels to walk in the other person's shoes. And maybe that's just, you know, one lesson, where they switch places, because it is different physically, and what happens on the floor with all the couples dancing would change as well. So that was my sort of rumination after that. The event itself was amazing, having 340 kids dance the Macarena, and nobody got slammed in the face at all was pretty impressive, you know. It's like, anyway, so that was my only question, was can we give the children an opportunity to switch? And then,
Yep, everybody should.
lead, everybody should follow.
yeah,
Yep.
Why
exactly.
not?
So, there we go, that's it.
It was fun to watch.
Thanks for sharing that.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I think say happy Thanksgiving.
Happy
Thanksgiving, everybody have a good break.
Yes. And,
I motion to adjourn.
Oh,
Oh,
yes,
hold on.
hold on.
Library board interviews,
yes.
Yes,
December
this
fifth,
5th,
fourth, fifth.
fourth.
whatever
Fourth.
day it is.
I need to make sure we have a quorum for that. I can't be here.
I'll be here.
I'll be here.
there.
It's a quorum.
Good.
Okay.
So I motion to adjourn.
I second again.
Ms. Lewis,
Yes.
Mr. Wright,
Yes.
Mr. Posh.
Yes.
Mr. Hines,
Yes.
Ms. Serene.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody.